I used to believe that betrayal always came from strangers. I believed lies belonged to scammers, criminals, and people with bad intentions. I was wrong. The biggest betrayal of my life came from the two people I trusted the most, my parents, and it all started with a simple email on an ordinary Tuesday morning. But before I tell you about that email, I need to tell you about my grandfather, because none of this would make sense without him. My name is Emily. I'm 34 years old, and for the last 10 years, I've worked as a financial fraud investigator. My job is simple to explain and difficult to do. I investigate lies. I look for hidden transactions, fake signatures, suspicious transfers, and people who think they're clever enough to fool everyone around them. Most days, I sit in front of my computer with a cup of coffee and thousands of pages of financial documents. Some people think my work sounds boring. I think it's fascinating. Because money tells stories. Every payment, every transfer, every signature leaves a trail. And if you know where to look, people reveal who they really are. I learned that lesson from my grandfather. His name was Robert. He wasn't rich when he was young. In fact, he grew up in poverty. He worked every kind of job imaginable. He cleaned offices. He drove delivery trucks. He worked night shifts. He saved every dollar he could. Over time, he built a successful construction company. By the time I was born, he had become financially comfortable, but he never forgot where he came from. He used to tell me something when I was little. Money isn't power, sweetheart. Money is protection. It's freedom. Never let anyone take your freedom. At the time, I didn't understand what he meant. I was 8 years old. I only cared about ice cream and cartoons. But he repeated those words so many times that they became part of me. I spent a lot of time with my grandfather. More than anyone else in the family. Every Saturday, he would pick me up from my parents' house. We would go to the park. We would feed ducks by the lake. Then we'd stop at a small bakery and buy chocolate cookies. He never missed a Saturday, not once. He listened to me. He remembered every detail of my life. When I got an A in school, he celebrated. When I cried because a friend hurt my feelings, he listened. When I was scared about changing schools, he sat beside me for hours. He made me feel important, seen, loved. As I got older, our relationship only became stronger. I was 15 when I first told him I wanted to work in investigations. Most people laughed. He didn't. He smiled. "You notice things other people miss," he said. "That makes you dangerous to dishonest people." I still remember laughing. "Dangerous," he nodded. The truth scares liars. Years later, I would realize how right he was. When I graduated from university, my grandfather looked prouder than anyone else. He hugged me tightly. "I knew you'd do something special." I almost cried. He was the first person who truly believed in me. Then, 2 years later, everything changed. He got sick. The diagnosis came suddenly. The doctors tried to stay positive, but I could see the fear in their faces. I visited him every day. Some days he looked stronger. Other days he looked tired, very tired. One evening, I sat beside his hospital bed. The sun was setting outside the window. He looked at me and smiled. "You've always been my brave girl." I tried to smile back. "You're going to be okay." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached for my hand. "I won't always be here." I immediately shook my head. "Please don't say that." He squeezed my hand. "Listen to me." I started crying. He waited until I looked at him again. "I need you to remember something." I nodded. "Trust your instincts, they've never failed you." I wiped my tears. "And don't depend on anyone for your future. Build your own security." I tried not to cry harder. He smiled gently. "I've made sure you'll always have protection." I didn't understand what he meant. I thought he was simply giving advice. I had no idea he had already made plans for me. 3 weeks later, he passed away. I thought my heart would break. At the funeral, I could barely stand. I remember watching people place flowers near his casket. I remember hearing everyone talk about what a kind man he was. I remember feeling completely empty. For months, I couldn't walk past the bakery we used to visit. I couldn't feed ducks at the lake. Everything reminded me of him. Then one day, a lawyer contacted me. I drove to his office feeling nervous. I thought there was paperwork related to my grandfather's estate. I had no idea my entire future was about to change. The lawyer smiled warmly. Your grandfather cared about you very much. I smiled sadly. He did. The lawyer opened a file. Several years ago, he established a trust in your name. I stared at him. A trust, he nodded. He explained everything carefully. My grandfather had invested money over many years. He had added insurance benefits and other assets. By the time everything was finalized, the trust was worth approximately $520,000. I couldn't speak. $520,000. It didn't feel real. The lawyer smiled. He wanted you to have financial security. I looked down at the documents. I started crying, not because of the money. Because suddenly, even after his death, my grandfather was still protecting me. I remember driving home that day with tears in my eyes. I felt like he had reached across time and wrapped his arms around me. I promised myself something. I would never waste what he gave me. I would honor his trust. And for years, I did exactly that. I worked hard. I built my career. I invested carefully. I lived below my means. I never touched the trust except for occasional adjustments recommended by professionals. Meanwhile, my relationship with my parents seemed perfectly normal. My mother called me every Sunday. My father asked about work. We celebrated birthdays together. We had holiday dinners. Nothing seemed unusual. If someone had asked me to describe my family, I would have called us close. Not perfect, but close. Looking back now, I wonder if I simply wasn't paying attention. Because sometimes the signs exist long before we notice them. 3 months before everything happened, I ended a serious relationship. My boyfriend and I had been together for nearly 4 years. I honestly thought we would get married. Instead, we grew apart. There was no huge fight, no betrayal, just two people moving in different directions. Ending it still hurt. I spent weeks feeling lonely. My mother called often. She worried about me. You sound tired. I'm fine. No, you're not, I smiled. I'll survive, she sighed. I hate seeing you alone. At the time, her concern felt comforting. I thought she was simply being a mother. I had no reason to think otherwise. Then came that Tuesday morning. I woke up early. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table checking emails. Most messages were boring, work updates, advertisements, newsletters. Then I saw one subject line. Important notice regarding your trust account. I frowned. I opened it, and my world changed. The message was short, very short. Your trust account has been temporarily frozen due to concerns raised by the trustees. I blinked. I read it again, and again. My coffee suddenly tasted bitter. Frozen, concerns, trustees. I sat completely still. Then my heart started racing. This had to be a mistake. I immediately called the trust administrator. After confirming my identity, the representative sighed. Miss Carter, the trustees recently requested temporary restrictions. Who requested them? A pause. Your parents. Everything inside me went silent. My parents? Yes, I couldn't breathe. I thanked her and ended the call. I sat there staring at the wall. My parents had frozen my trust. $520,000, my future, my grandfather's final gift. And they had done it without telling me. I picked up my phone. I called my mother. She answered immediately. Hi, sweetheart. My voice shook. Mom, why is my trust frozen? Silence. Then she said something that changed everything. We're only trying to protect you. At that moment, I had absolutely no idea that I was about to uncover the biggest lie my family had ever hidden from me. Protect me from what? I asked the question slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. On the other end of the line, my mother sighed. From making emotional decisions. I frowned. What emotional decisions? You're going through a difficult time after your breakup. We thought it would be better if the money wasn't available right now. For a few seconds, I couldn't even speak. I was 34 years old. I had a successful career. I paid my bills on time. I owned my apartment. I had no debt. And my parents thought I wasn't responsible enough to have access to my own trust fund. Mom, did you really freeze my account because I ended a relationship? I know you're upset. Answer the question. There was a pause. Yes, I closed my eyes. Nothing about this made sense. I had experienced breakups before. I had never made reckless decisions. I wasn't shopping for luxury cars. I wasn't planning a vacation around the world. I wasn't doing anything unusual. I was simply living my life. I'll come over tonight, I said. Emily, I'll be there at 7. I hung up. Then I sat there for a long time. Something felt wrong, not strange, wrong. After 10 years of investigating fraud cases, my instincts had become sharp. I had learned to listen to that small voice in my head, and right now, that voice was screaming. People lie for many reasons: fear, embarrassment, greed, desperation, but lies always leave clues. I finished my coffee and opened my laptop. I wasn't investigating my parents, not yet. I simply wanted information. I logged into the trust portal. The account status showed exactly what the email had stated: temporary restriction in place. I clicked through several documents. Nothing unusual. Then I reached the trustee activity section. I frowned. There had been recent communication between my parents and the trust administration office. Several requests, multiple emails. A review process, additional paperwork. I felt my stomach tighten. This wasn't a quick decision. This had taken time. My parents had been planning something. I looked at the clock. 8:30 in the morning. I should have been getting ready for work. Instead, I found myself staring at the screen. I finally closed the laptop. No, I needed to calm down. I needed facts. Facts first, feelings later. That had always been my rule. At work, I tried to focus. I really did, but my concentration was gone. I sat in my office looking at financial reports without actually reading them. Around noon, my coworker Sarah appeared at my door. "You look terrible." I laughed weakly. "Thanks," she sat across from me. "What happened?" I hesitated. "My parents froze my trust account." She blinked. "They did what?" I repeated the story. When I finished, she looked as confused as I felt. "That doesn't make any sense." "I know. Did they explain it?" "They said they're protecting me." Sarah folded her arms. "From what?" "Apparently from myself." She stared at me. Then she said something that made my heart sink. "If this came across my desk as an investigation, I'd think something else was happening." I looked at her, because I had already been thinking exactly the same thing. At 5 o'clock, I drove directly to my parents' house. The sun was beginning to set. I parked in front of the same house where I had grown up. Suddenly, I felt nervous. I couldn't explain why. I simply did. My mother opened the door. She looked worried. "Come inside." I stepped in. The house smelled like coffee and cinnamon. Everything looked exactly the same. Family photographs covered the walls. My graduation picture, vacation pictures, birthday celebrations, memories everywhere. For a moment, I almost felt silly. Maybe they really were worried about me. Maybe I was overthinking everything. Then I walked into the dining room. My father was already sitting at the table. He looked serious, very serious. "We need to talk," he said. I sat down. "Okay," my mother joined us. Then nobody spoke. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why did you freeze my trust?" My father folded his hands. "We're concerned about your emotional state." I almost laughed. "You've said that already." "What exactly are you concerned about?" "You've been alone, so, you've seemed unhappy. So," he sighed, "we don't want you making impulsive decisions." I stared at him. This conversation felt rehearsed. Every answer sounded prepared. Every sentence sounded carefully chosen. I suddenly noticed something. My father wasn't looking at me. He kept glancing at the table. My mother kept twisting her wedding ring. Nervous habits, tiny details. Most people never notice them. Fraud investigators do. I asked another question. "When did you decide this?" My father answered immediately. "Recently." Lie, I knew it instantly. Because people who tell the truth usually answer naturally. People who lie often answer too quickly. "Recently," I repeated. "Yes." I looked at my mother. She suddenly stood up. "I'll make tea." She almost hurried into the kitchen. I watched her leave. Something inside me became cold. I looked back at my father. "Did something happen?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Of course." Lie again. I could feel it. I had spent years sitting across from people who lied about financial crimes. I knew how discomfort looked, and my father looked uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. I decided to try a different approach. Is someone sick? No. Are you having money problems? For the first time, he looked directly at me. No. Another lie. This time I was certain, because I saw it. Only for a second, fear. I knew that expression. I had seen it hundreds of times. People become afraid when you're accidentally getting close to the truth. My mother returned with tea. Nobody touched it. I looked at both of them. I don't understand any of this. My mother reached for my hand. We're your parents. We only want what's best for you. I slowly pulled my hand away. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because something no longer felt safe. I stood up. I think I should go. Emily, I'm tired. I walked toward the door. My father followed me. You're angry? I turned around. No. I surprised myself with that answer, because I wasn't angry, not anymore. I was suspicious. And suspicion felt much worse. I drove home in complete silence. The entire way, my grandfather's voice echoed in my head. Trust your instincts. They've never failed you. By the time I reached my apartment, I had made a decision. I was going to investigate. Not because I wanted to accuse my parents of something, because I needed answers. I opened my laptop. I requested every available document connected to my trust, every email, every amendment request, every communication. Then I waited. The documents arrived the next morning. I made coffee. I sat at my kitchen table, and I started reading. At first, everything looked normal. Then I reached a section labeled, Trustee Request History. I frowned. There had been multiple requests over the last 6 months. Not one, not two, several. I kept reading. Then I froze. One request had been denied. Another had required additional verification. Another had been withdrawn. I leaned closer to the screen. My heart was beating faster. These weren't requests to temporarily freeze my account. These were requests to modify certain trust terms. I stopped breathing. Modify? Why? I opened the first document, then the second, then the third, and suddenly I wasn't reading as a daughter anymore. I was reading as an investigator, and every instinct I had was telling me the same thing. My parents hadn't suddenly decided to protect me. They had been trying to do something with my trust fund for months. Months. I looked at the documents again. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. At the bottom of one page was a company name I had never seen before. And I had absolutely no idea that this tiny detail was about to expose the biggest secret my parents had ever kept from me. I stared at the company name on my screen. I had never seen it before. Northridge Development Group, LLC. The name meant nothing to me, but after 10 years of investigating financial fraud, I had learned something important. When unfamiliar company names suddenly appear inside financial documents, you pay attention. I took another sip of coffee. It had gone cold. Outside my apartment window, people were walking to work. Cars moved through the streets. Everything looked completely normal. Inside my apartment, my entire world had started to feel unfamiliar. I opened another browser tab and searched for the company. Nothing. I tried again. Still nothing. That was strange. Most legitimate businesses leave footprints. A website, social media, news articles, business listings. This company seemed almost invisible. I leaned back in my chair. Invisible companies make investigators nervous. I searched public records. A result finally appeared. I clicked it. The company had been registered 11 months earlier. Its business address was a small office building about 40 minutes away from my apartment. Then I looked at the listed directors, and my heart stopped. My father's name was there. I stared at the screen. I blinked. Then I read it again. And again. There was no mistake. My father, director, Northridge Development Group. I sat completely still. I wasn't shocked because my father owned a company. I was shocked because I had absolutely no idea it existed. My parents and I spoke regularly. We celebrated birthdays together. We had holiday dinners. My mother called me every Sunday. How could my father own a company that I had never heard about? I suddenly remembered our conversation the previous evening. Are you having money problems? No, lie. I looked back at the screen. Then I kept searching. A few minutes later, I found additional records. The company had several outstanding financial obligations. I frowned. I opened the documents. Then my stomach dropped. The debts weren't small. Some were overdue invoices. Others appeared to be business loans. The total amount made my chest tighten. It was a lot of money, a very large amount of money. I sat there in silence. Questions began filling my mind. Why would my parents hide this? How bad was the situation? And why was this company's name appearing inside trust documents? I suddenly felt sick. I closed my laptop. I stood up. Then I started pacing around my apartment. I wasn't investigating strangers. I was investigating my family. The people who raised me. The people who taught me right from wrong. The people who attended every school event and every graduation ceremony. This felt unreal. Part of me wanted to stop, close the laptop, forget everything, pretend none of this existed. But another part of me couldn't ignore what I had already seen, because investigators don't stop asking questions, especially when the answers don't make sense. I sat back down. I picked up my phone. There was one person who might know something. My cousin Hannah. She had always been close to everyone in the family. If something had happened, she might have heard about it. She answered after the second ring. Hey, it's been forever. I forced a smile. Hi, she immediately noticed my voice. What's wrong? I took a deep breath. I need to ask you something. Okay, did my parents start some kind of business recently? Silence. Then she said something unexpected. You don't know. My heart started beating faster. Know what? Another pause. I thought they told you. Told me what? They invested in a real estate project with Uncle Mark. I frowned. What project? I don't know all the details. Something about commercial properties. I sat down slowly. When did this happen? Last year, nearly an entire year. I couldn't believe it. How much did they invest? I honestly don't know. Did it work? Silence. Then she sighed. I don't think so. My stomach tightened. Hannah, what happened? She sounded uncomfortable. I heard they lost a lot of money. I closed my eyes. A lot of money. I thanked her and ended the call. Then I simply sat there. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't understand why nobody had told me. Then memories started coming back. Little moments. Small details. Things I hadn't paid attention to before. My mother canceling dinner plans. My father looking distracted during Christmas. Their decision not to take a vacation. Suddenly everything looked different. I had mistaken stress for tiredness. I had mistaken anxiety for aging. I had missed the signs because I trusted them. I trusted them completely. I suddenly remembered something else. About 6 months earlier, my mother had asked an unusual question. We had been having lunch together. Out of nowhere, she had asked, have you ever thought about using some of your trust money? I laughed. Not really, she smiled. Not even for something exciting? No, she looked disappointed. At the time, I didn't think much about it. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. I opened my laptop again. I searched through my old messages. Then I found another one, a text from my father. How much flexibility does your trust have? I had answered casually. I don't know. Why? He never replied. I stared at the message. My heart hurt. Not because I was discovering financial problems, because I was starting to see something much worse. This wasn't sudden. The questions, the curiosity. The trust amendments, the company, the frozen account, everything connected, everything. I looked at my grandfather's framed photograph sitting on my bookshelf. He was smiling in the picture. I suddenly missed him more than I had in years. He would have known something was wrong. He always noticed things. I picked up the frame. I don't understand any of this, I whispered. For some reason, tears filled my eyes. Because for the first time, I started considering something painful. What if my parents weren't protecting me? What if they were trying to reach my money? I immediately shook my head. No, that couldn't be true. Parents don't do that. Do they? I placed the photograph back on the shelf, then I laughed sadly. I spent my entire career investigating financial deception. I had seen brothers steal from sisters, children steal from parents, business partners destroy each other. I had seen greed ruin relationships. Yet somehow, I still believed my own family was different. I looked at the company records again. Then I noticed something else. A second name appeared in the registration documents. I froze. Mark Bennett. Uncle Mark, my father's younger brother. I closed my eyes. Uncle Mark, I knew exactly who he was. And I knew exactly what kind of decisions he made. Growing up, he was always chasing opportunities. New businesses, investment schemes, big promises. None of them lasted. He always talked about becoming wealthy. He always needed one more chance, one more investment, one more idea. My grandfather used to worry about him. I suddenly remembered something. Years ago, I overheard my grandfather talking to my father. Mark isn't careful with money. He means well. Meaning well doesn't pay debts. At the time, I hadn't understood the conversation. Now every word came back. I opened more records. My hands were shaking slightly. Then I found it, a lawsuit. I opened the document. My heart dropped. Northridge Development Group was being sued by contractors for unpaid amounts. There were claims of outstanding debts, payment disputes, missed obligations. I kept reading. The numbers became larger. And larger and larger. Then I stopped, because suddenly everything made sense. The trust freeze, the attempted amendments, the questions about my money, the nervous behavior. My parents weren't trying to protect me. They were drowning, financially drowning, and they believed my trust fund was the lifeboat. I started crying. Not dramatic crying, not loud crying. Just quiet tears, because no matter how much evidence I found, they were still my parents. I remembered my father teaching me to ride a bicycle. I remembered my mother staying awake all night when I had the flu. I remembered Christmas mornings, birthday cakes, family vacations. And now I was sitting alone in my apartment, looking at evidence that suggested my own parents had been trying to gain access to the money my grandfather left for me. The betrayal felt unbearable. I cried for nearly an hour. Then eventually I wiped my face. I looked at my reflection in the dark computer screen. I looked exhausted, but I also looked determined. Because I still didn't know everything. I had pieces of the story, not the whole picture. I needed facts, every fact, no assumptions, no emotions, facts. I opened a notebook. Then I started making a timeline. Company created, financial losses, questions about my trust, amendment requests, frozen account. The story was taking shape, but I still had one terrible feeling. A feeling I couldn't ignore. I hadn't reached the bottom of this yet, and something told me the truth was about to become even worse. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw numbers, debts, lawsuits, trust documents, my father's name, Uncle Mark's name, and my grandfather's face. By 3 in the morning, I was sitting on my couch with a blanket around my shoulders, staring at the darkness outside my window. I kept asking myself the same question. How did we get here? How did a family that looked so normal end up hiding something this big? I wanted answers. Real answers, not excuses, not carefully prepared sentences. The truth. The next morning, I called my office and took the day off. Then I gathered every document I had. I printed company records, lawsuits, trust communications, public filings. I placed everything inside a folder. By the time I finished, the folder looked thick enough to be a legal case. Maybe it was. I drove to my parents' house. The entire way there, my hands felt cold. I wasn't nervous about discovering the truth anymore. I was nervous about hearing it. Because once people tell you who they really are, you can't go back. I parked outside the house. For several seconds, I just sat there. The curtains were open. I could see my mother moving around the kitchen. Everything looked normal. That's the strange thing about betrayal. The world doesn't look different. The sky doesn't turn gray. Birds still sing. Cars still pass by. Everything appears exactly the same. Except you become different. I finally got out of the car and walked to the door. My mother answered almost immediately. She looked surprised. "Emily, we need to talk." She opened the door. I walked inside. My father was in the living room. The moment he saw my face, he stood up. Nobody smiled. Nobody asked how I was doing. Somehow, all of us knew why I was there. I placed the folder on the coffee table. We're done pretending. Silence. I opened the folder and removed several papers. I looked at my father. You own a company called Northridge Development Group. He said nothing. I looked at my mother. You both invested money into a real estate project. Silence. I placed another document on the table. The company has debts. No answer. Then I placed the lawsuit documents in front of them. And it's being sued. The room became so quiet that I could hear the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. Finally, I looked directly at my father. Tell me the truth. Nobody spoke. I waited. Then my father slowly sat down, and suddenly he looked older, much older. He rubbed his face with both hands. We made mistakes, I swallowed. What kind of mistakes? He looked at my mother. She was already crying. That scared me, because my mother almost never cried. We invested more than we should have, she whispered. How much? Neither of them answered. How much? My father looked down. Almost everything we had. I felt my stomach drop. Everything. They had lost almost everything. I slowly sat down across from them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Why? My father looked exhausted. Mark came to me with an opportunity. Uncle Mark. Of course. He said we could invest in commercial properties. He said it would change our future. I closed my eyes. I knew this story. I had seen it hundreds of times. Big promises, easy money. Guaranteed success, the beginning of countless financial disasters. When did you realize it wasn't working? A few months later. I looked at him. And you kept investing anyway. He nodded slowly. I couldn't understand it. You knew it was failing. We thought we could recover. I almost laughed, not because it was funny. Because it was tragic. People do strange things when they start losing money. They don't stop. They chase the loss. They convince themselves that one more investment will fix everything. Usually, it only makes things worse. I looked around the room. The family photographs suddenly felt different, almost painful. Why didn't you tell me? Neither of them answered. Why didn't you tell me? My mother wiped her eyes. We were embarrassed. That answer hurt, because I understood it. People hide financial problems because money and pride are deeply connected. Admitting failure feels like admitting weakness. I looked at both of them. You froze my trust. My father's face changed. Immediately, there it was, the real conversation. He looked down. I waited. Then finally he spoke. We were desperate. The words hit me harder than I expected. Desperate. I suddenly couldn't breathe properly. My mother started crying again. We didn't know what else to do. I stared at her. You tried to access my trust. We only wanted to borrow it. Borrow. The word sounded absurd. I almost couldn't speak. $520,000. We weren't going to take all of it. I laughed softly, not because I was amused, because I was heartbroken. I looked at my father. How much? Silence. How much? He looked directly at me. 300,000. I felt like all the air had left the room. $300,000. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I just stared at him. My grandfather had spent years building that security for me. Years. And my parents had planned to take more than half of it. We would have paid it back. I looked at my father. His voice sounded sincere, and somehow that made everything even worse, because he actually believed it. I realized something terrible in that moment. Desperation had completely changed their thinking. They didn't see theft, they saw survival. They had rewritten the story inside their own minds. They believed they were borrowing. They believed everything would eventually work out. I suddenly felt exhausted. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shouting. I was simply tired, deeply tired. I looked at my mother. Did you ever think about asking me? She cried harder. We couldn't. Why? Because we knew what the answer would be. Silence filled the room. There it was, the truth they knew. They knew what they were doing was wrong. That's why they hid it. That's why they lied. That's why they froze my account. Because if they had asked openly, they would have had to hear the word no. I stood up. Both of them looked at me. What happens now? My mother whispered. I looked at them for a long time, then I answered honestly. I don't know. And for the first time in my entire life, I realized I no longer trusted my parents. I left the house. I sat inside my car. Then I cried. I cried harder than I had at my breakup. Harder than I had in years, because this wasn't about money, it was about safety. Parents are supposed to protect your future. Mine had nearly taken it. Eventually, I stopped crying. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. Then my investigator instincts returned. I knew exactly what needed to happen. I drove home. I organized every document. I wrote detailed notes. I prepared a complete report. Then I contacted the trust administrators. I requested an urgent review. I submitted everything. The company records the debts, the lawsuits, the attempted amendments. Everything. Then I waited. 3 days later, they called. The investigation was complete. My parents' authority over any trust decisions had been permanently removed. Additional protections had been added. No modifications would ever happen without my direct approval, and my trust account was fully restored. $520,000. Safe. Untouched, I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt empty, because the money had survived, but my family hadn't. Then that evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. I stared at the screen. For several seconds, I didn't answer. Then I pressed the button. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Emily, I need to tell you something." I closed my eyes. And what she said next changed everything all over again. I held my phone tightly. My mother's voice sounded different, smaller, fragile. "Emily, I need to tell you something." I closed my eyes. "What is it?" There was a long silence, then she said it. "We've lost the house." For several seconds, I didn't speak. I thought I had heard her wrong. "What? The bank is taking it." I sat down slowly. "The house. My childhood home, the place where every Christmas had happened. The place where my grandfather had picked me up every Saturday morning. The place where my mother measured my height on the kitchen wall every year. That house. Gone." I heard my mother crying softly. "We tried everything." I looked out my apartment window. The city lights seemed blurry. "How long have you known?" "A few weeks." A few weeks. Another secret. Another lie. I suddenly felt tired. Not angry, not shocked, just tired, because I was beginning to realize something. My parents had been living inside a financial disaster for months, maybe even a year, every smile. Every family dinner, every phone call. They had carried this fear alone, and instead of asking for help, they had chosen deception. I took a deep breath. "What happens now?" "We have to leave in 30 days. I closed my eyes. I imagined strangers walking through that house, removing furniture, changing locks, erasing memories. I heard my mother crying again. "I'm sorry." I didn't answer immediately, because I didn't know what to say. Finally, I spoke. "I'm sorry too." Then we both sat there in silence. Because sometimes there are no perfect words. Sometimes people break things that cannot be repaired with apologies. That night, I barely slept. I kept remembering my childhood. I remembered sitting on my father's shoulders. I remembered my mother reading bedtime stories. I remembered family movie nights. I remembered feeling safe. How could the same people become strangers? The answer came to me sometime around 3 in the morning. They hadn't become strangers. They had become desperate. And desperation changes people. It doesn't always make them evil, but it can make them forget who they are. The next few weeks passed quietly. The trust administrators finalized everything. The money remained protected, $520,000. Exactly as my grandfather intended. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt sad, because there was no celebration, no happiness, no feeling of revenge. There was only loss. Then one afternoon, my father called. I almost didn't answer, but I did. "Hello." His voice sounded tired, very tired. "I wanted to thank you." I frowned. "For what?" "For not destroying us." I looked out the window, destroying them. The truth was I had evidence. I understood financial law. I knew exactly how serious unauthorized attempts to access a trust could become. I could have made things much worse. But I didn't, because they were still my parents. I couldn't forget that. "I didn't protect you," I said softly. "I protected myself." He was quiet. Then he said something I will never forget. "That's what your grandfather would have wanted." Tears immediately filled my eyes, because he was right. My grandfather had spent his entire life teaching me independence, protection, boundaries, responsibility. He would never have wanted me to destroy myself trying to save people who had made bad choices. I failed him, my father whispered. I swallowed hard. No, yes, you made terrible decisions, silence, but one mistake doesn't erase an entire life. I heard him crying. I had heard my father cry only once before, at my grandfather's funeral. I don't know how this happened. Neither did I, but somehow I understood. Nobody wakes up one morning planning to lose everything. Bad decisions usually happen slowly. One compromise, one risk. One excuse, one secret, then another, and another, until the person staring back at you in the mirror becomes someone you no longer recognize. A few days later, I visited my parents. The house looked different. Boxes were everywhere. Photographs had been removed from the walls. The rooms felt empty. I walked through the living room. So many memories lived there. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, movie nights. My mother was wrapping dishes in newspaper. My father was packing books. Neither of them looked up immediately. They looked embarrassed, ashamed, older. My mother finally spoke. "I didn't think you'd come," I smiled sadly. I wasn't sure either. Nobody knew what to say. Eventually, I started helping. I wrapped plates. I packed books. I folded blankets. For several hours, we worked quietly. Then I found something, an old photo album. I sat on the floor and opened it. There I was, age 6, missing front teeth, holding an ice cream cone. I turned the page. Age 10, riding my bicycle. My father was running beside me. Another page, my graduation, my mother crying. I suddenly started crying too. Because these pictures were real. These moments had happened. The love had been real. The betrayal had also been real. Both things could exist at the same time. My mother sat beside me. She looked at the photographs, then she looked at me. "We never stopped loving you." I wiped my eyes. "I know," she looked surprised. "I do know." "Then why does everything feel broken?" I thought about it. Because love and trust are not the same thing. People can love you deeply and still hurt you. People can want the best for you and still make selfish decisions. I looked at my mother. Because trust is fragile. She started crying again. "I'm sorry," I nodded. "I know." And for the first time, I truly meant it. I believed she was sorry. I believed my father was sorry. But forgiveness and trust are different things. You can forgive someone and still protect yourself. You can love someone and still create boundaries. I helped them finish packing. Then I stood outside the house one last time. The sun was setting. I looked at the windows. I looked at the front door. I looked at the tree in the yard where I used to play. Then I took a deep breath, and I let it go. Over the next year, my parents moved into a small apartment. They met with financial counselors. They found jobs. Slowly, they began rebuilding their lives, not because someone rescued them, because they finally accepted responsibility. As for me, I kept working. I continued investigating fraud. I invested carefully. I protected my future. The trust money remained untouched. Not because I was afraid to use it, because every time I looked at it, I remembered my grandfather's words. Money isn't power. Money is protection. It's freedom. Now I finally understood. The money wasn't the real gift. The lesson was, because life can change overnight. Businesses fail. Relationships end. People make terrible choices, even the people you trust most. But if you protect your independence, you protect your ability to stand back up. Today, my relationship with my parents still exists. We have dinner sometimes. We talk on birthdays. We check on each other, but something changed forever. And that's okay. Not every broken thing returns to what it was before. Some things become different. Some scars remain. And some lessons stay with you for life. The day my parents froze my trust, they thought they were taking control of my future. Instead, they reminded me exactly who I am. I investigate fraud. I follow facts. I trust my instincts. And most importantly, I never allow someone else's desperation to become my destruction. Because money can be earned again. Houses can be replaced. Businesses can be rebuilt. But your peace, your self-respect, and your freedom are priceless. And thanks to my grandfather, I never forgot that.